It's Wild Assent Week and we have some amazing prizes that you could win. We'll be choosing winners from 3 of our communities, 1 from the comments on YouTube, 1 from the comments from OnTableTop.com, and 1 from the Cult of Games members, so you guys get an extra chance to win. Get your comments in, and we hope you enjoy the week.
Hello everybody, I'm joined once again by Robert from Lazy Squire Games, and we've had a lot of fun this past week with Wild Assent, but I thought it'd be nice to have a sit down and a bit of a chat about Lazy Squire and everything they're up to. So it's a pleasure to have you back on the channel once again.
It's great to be here.
So before we get into anything too particular, I thought we'd kick things off with a nice easy pitch. Who is Robert McConnell from Lazy Squire Games, and how did you get into gaming?
Gaming? I mean, how far back do you want to go?
I'm happy, go all the way back to Tiddlywinks.
Well, my friend had an Atari and another friend had a Nintendo, and I knew this was for me. But for board gaming, my introduction, I believe, I had an old Citadel card game that was like the only kind of I don't know, nerd adjacent kind of thing versus like Monopoly, and I had that when I was like 9 or 10, I think. And then I didn't really realize how much of a industry it was until I think it was junior high, and I wanted to get the Hercules, the Legendary Journeys collectible card game, and unfortunately Xena came out first, and so I was going to the game store and just like buying packs after packs, and there was tons of other stuff there, and then it kind of just steamrolled from there. For how I got into the industry, I loved Kickstarter once I found it, because I have no concept of money. I am an excellent backer. I don't read updates, I don't make comments, I just back and then forget, and then when it shows up at my doorstep, I hope my wife didn't see.
It's like a present from your past self to your future self. That's exactly how I treat it as well.
It's great because it'll show up and she's like, what's that? I say, well, don't worry about that, I bought that 2 years ago. So it's like there's like a statute of limitations on the purchase, and it's always expired by the time I get the game. But yeah, so I was looking around, and I kind of got interested in the idea of working on games myself, and so I made some inquiries, I wrote some lore and tried to edit some rule books and such, and then finally in I think it was the end of 2017, actually made the company Lazy Squire Games, and me and a few intrepid souls started making. First, it was Partition, which failed, but and then because that was a card game, and we had no experience in card games, but then we made Wild Assent, and we've had some people leave, we had some people come on, and it's been an interesting ride. A lot of heartache. It's been a fun ride.
It's fascinating that you've come into it from that, I suppose, that short amount of time, because generally when we're talking to people, it's like, oh, I've always been interested in games design, and I've done this and I've done that, and you get the slow progression where you just went, you know what, I really just want to make a game, and at first you don't succeed. Make a bigger game, because surely a card game would have been easier to do than Wild Assent. I mean, even obviously Wild Assent grew during the campaign from the core setting to adding the Silverstrim and the additional stretch goals and all of that sort of barreled on top. But going from a deck of cards to a miniature based board game is a big step for anyone, especially somebody who's essentially just doing it for the first time.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be clear, I'd worked on campaigns and stuff prior to that, and they were all miniatures campaigns. We had no experience with card games.
Oh, right. You would have been better off going for the bigger one right off the bat.
Yeah, we probably should have. Our goal was to have an easy campaign, because those exist, and have a card game that would be easy to produce, and then we'd send it out, because the game was like basically ready when we launched the campaign. But yeah, I mean, we're actually going to go back to it at some point, now that we have a little more experience, maybe a little less hubris. And I wanted to make comics when I was in high school, because I liked writing stories, but I didn't like writing all the scene descriptions, etc. I wanted to write dialogue and a plot, and that was it. And so that's actually helped in making this kind of thing. But just playing a lot of games also helps with game design. The more you play, it doesn't have to be board games, it can be video games.
Sure.
Whatever content you consume helps with design, helps with world building, which that's more of what I do at the moment anyway.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You've mentioned lore and writing the lore in the past. Is that solely where you come from then, as far as Wild Ascent and Stormsunder? Are you focused more on the world building and creation for Lazy Squire, and then you can bring other people in who might be more proficient mechanically with, if we do this, then this will make the game play this way, and you're going, well, yeah, that sounds great, I don't care, let me tell you about my idea for Berserker Vampire Twin. Or or do you just dabble in sort of everything as and when you need to?
Well, everything's a team effort. I am not an island. I'm technically the only employee of Lazy Squire Games, but I'm certainly not the only person who has been there from the beginning. But for a design perspective, it depends. Wild Ascent kind of coalesced like around the arena mode, and I didn't have I had a hand in it, but I ended up having more involvement with the hunt mode, and so my job was really more of like making a story about the around this like sort of like Pokemon Blood and Sand that we had. And it was funny because that story ended up making the hunt mode, because we had the Assents who controlled creatures, and I was like, well, they're gonna die. We need some way for them to like refill their coffers of combatants. And so I made this whole idea about where the creatures come from, and then the Seekers going after it. And then suddenly we decided to make like a game out of that too. And so we had like 2 games in one, which is insanity, but it's apparently what we do. Stormsunder, we were trying to figure out what we wanted to work on next as we were making Wild Ascent, and I had this idea. It was actually it was only a couple months after Wild Ascent's campaign, and it was really just this handful of characters in a cabin during this storm. The whole game kind of came out of that. We used Wild Ascent as like the basis for design. My involvement like nowadays, and to an extent with Stormsunder, really came from, I'm there like at the beginning, like the adventure card game thing. I was pushing that, like, I don't care how many cards we have, this is going to be awesome. And so like, now we have like 2,000 cards, like I don't care. And so like a lot of that design stuff early on, and then like the encounters, the actual fights, my involvement is more of like, okay, this is where the characters are, this is what they're facing. Can you guys go ahead and handle that? Because I need to write another like 100 pages. So it's weird. Like I'm in and out for design, and then other people much smarter than me help through the process, and then run with it.
Do you then find yourself when you're, for example, if you're writing a piece of lore and then something sort of takes a life of its own, specifically for things like Stormsunder, which is so very narrative driven, it's almost like you're playing through a novel on the tabletop. So you're there and you're writing the background, you're writing the lore, and this is going to happen, and this feeds into this, and then maybe you go off on a tangent and think, oh well, that would be interesting if this happened, and all of a sudden you've got a new character woven into it. Or do you try and work within some form of limitations and constrictions? Because Stormsunder blew up massively, from what I could see, where all of a sudden it's you're going, well, this would be complicated to navigate when there's a handful of figures working their way through Tar Pit, but then it suddenly became much larger, and because it's so heavily focused on the narrative, it felt like there must be an underlying thread here, predetermined. Or is it just more sort of fluid?
Well, I mean, like I said, the base set of characters were kind of created in that cabin in my head in like December 2018 or whatever. But it sometimes, we're a business too, and so sometimes there's been decisions that had nothing to do with lore that I just kind of wrote around or wrote in. My favorite for Stormsunder is Falheim. He's a half giant druid, and he was, I believe, concepted and sculpted before I even knew he existed. I was working a full-time job all the way up until after Stormsunder's campaign, and so I was working late. It was like year end because I was in a accounting position, and so like suddenly like we had this stretch goal. I'm like, well, who is that? And I was like, well, he's a half giant druid. And I'm like, he is, and so yeah, there he is. I love Valheim, and as soon as he came up after the campaign, because things were nuts.
Yeah.
I immediately started thinking like, oh well, I know exactly where he can be, because there's these mountains along the west of Tar Pit, and like I haven't really talked about anything beyond that. Like that's where the half giants are, and then there's like giants beyond that, and like it's everything just kind of went well. It was really funny because for Heirs of Ruin, the first part of Stormsunder, I didn't really expect to have the Hotem Ra, the lead villain in the game, to have like a presence in the first game,
Sure.
or at least much of a presence. I was going to build things up, and then Nicola, who's the project manager and basically the guy who makes Lazy Squire games run, he told me that like, Robert, all the sculpts for the Makati, that faction, they're the ones that are done. We need to show off them first. And so I was like, all right, so we're doing this now. And as soon as he told me that, I immediately thought like, oh, I know exactly how they can come in. And then and so like if I had my druthers, and that wouldn't be the best case scenario, but if I had my druthers, I wouldn't have put Egyptian zombies and mummies along with samurai, etc.
Yeah.
But all these things kind of just like started happening, whether it was a concept that one of our illustrator came up with, or everything just kind of like combines. That's why I say it's like a team effort. Even though the lore is my responsibility and I'm the one that pushes it and tries to like hold tight onto it, I am reacting to their greatness. They come up with something really cool, and then I fit it in. I'd say with Stormsunder, I've been a stickler on certain things, because they're like, I'd have that overall narrative. I knew basically how Stormsunder would end as soon as Stormsunder existed, before I'd even told anyone else. And so there were things I insisted on, whether it was like Vanessa there, how she looked, or the way the vampire twins should be. There were things that I pushed, but other things like Felheim I had nothing to do with, so he is exactly what he is, and I went with it. Winter right there is another good example. I had an idea of what she was in my head, and then we got the illustration, and I said, well, she looks a little quirky, and so I completely changed her character, and the story's better for it. Now, if that's of course all in the beginning process. If this stuff was happening after I've written like page after page of stuff, then I'd probably be a little less enthusiastic about it. But it's really
sudden changes.
Yeah, no last minute stuff. But you were talking about the like adding characters. I kind of did that. The villains and civilians packs that we had after the campaign, that was me telling Nicola, I was like, well, there's all these characters that we're going to have like proxies for, because what we have a ton of miniatures, but there's a ton of characters that are like in the world, and like I just started like rattling them off. I'm like, well, I made a whole Vampire High Council. There's like 8 of them still alive in the story. We made 2 of them, I think it was 3 by the time the campaign was over. It's like we could make the other 6 because you're going to run into them, and then it just it kind of went out of control from there. There has to be a limit at some point, but it's a lot of fun to try and get there, though.
Yeah. Well, I've heard of limits. People keep telling me there's a limit to how much stuff I can cram into my room, but there's always room for something else.
Yes.
Decanting is key. Does this mean that you have sort of lore Bibles almost for your worlds that you create? That you can then refer to, or is it just all in your head?
It depends. For Wild Assent, for example, I wrote a ton of stories for the art book, the art/lore book. And so that right now is kind of my Bible. I've referenced it when writing for Lavon Rising, usually for like little things like, well, how did I refer to the dungeons? Or like I kind of had like an idea of how the dungeons were set up in my head, and like where each person was located, and so I'd refer back, say, okay, well, I mentioned this, and so I kind of basically whatever's written down, I try and keep as like sacrosanct, and then anything else, it just shifts and twirls in my head until I type it up. Most of it does stay in my head. Like the plot for Stormsunder is I've told it to people, but like most of it is not written down. It's mostly just and that's because it shifts, and it's important that it shifts, especially with a sort of choose your own adventure style
Mhm.
board game, because a shift doesn't necessarily mean that the story has changed. It just means that a new path is opened that I
Mhm.
now have to write. So yeah.
Well, do you envisage going back then to, obviously, Wild Ascent is currently running with a new expansion for Lavon Rising, but potentially in a couple of years or whatever, going back to Stormsunder and then taking some of those characters and expanding their story into a new direction? Or do you think Stormsunder is more or less self-contained and you'll go for new projects from next on?
I don't think I could give up Stormsunder even after it's finished. I just
Mhm.
enjoy the world too much. Does that mean that we could end up having a another campaign book where, like maybe it's like a full-on villain, like all these, the Vampire High Council? Maybe we make them all playable characters, and then
Mhm.
you run a path where you're just with them. It could be,
Yeah.
or it could be like an extension of the story. The story has a finite end, but that doesn't mean that every character is dead or anything.
Sure.
But they could be. Um,
If you play your cards right,
yeah,
kids, you
or
never know.
yeah, exactly. Every time someone asks me about Stormsunder, I just kill their favorite character out of spite.
Oh, it's
Um,
the best
but
way.
it's I definitely don't think we're just going to be like, okay, we finished a Pharaoh's Wrath, Stormsunder's done.
Mhm.
I think it's really like it's too important a project to us for that. So I could definitely see us going down other paths. We've talked
Mhm.
about like making it so that you can make your own characters and play them through Stormsunder, because
Mhm.
we kind of created like an RPG behind the scenes to design the characters. So we had like a firm frame of reference for them.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things we could do with it, but as I tell people, we need to finish it first,
Yeah.
and that's the most important part. But we need to do it right. We've spent a lot of time on the miniatures. I definitely think we've made some good headway there, and it's going to take us a while, but it's going to be worth the wait for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the miniatures I've seen and some of the ones I brought up there, they look absolutely superb. And when we first got the, I suppose, resin prototypes, or maybe even 3D print prototypes, I'm not sure which, into the studio for Stormsunder, I was blown away by the amount of detail on them
Mhm.
and thought, well, it's going to be interesting to see how that actually replicates to the production versions. And then when we actually seen Kappa Rocca in the plastic and the
Mhm.
actual PVC form, I was blown away, because generally when people hear PVC, they tend to think negatively of it.
Mhm.
Like, it doesn't have the detail that you would get with hard plastics or with resins or what have you. But that quality was still there, and the detail was still there, despite having gone through a long manufacturing process to reach that point. That he did just look like he had stepped off the, well, I was going to say off the page, but off the card maybe, and really shone through. So it's beautiful to see the concepts coming to sort of the production end,
Mhm.
and still maintaining that consistency throughout.
Yeah, it's our sculptors have done amazing jobs, but Gustavo really he every single sculpt he has enhanced, and our manufacturer Longpack, they did a great job as well. But Gustavo went back from what they did, and then he took it to the next level.
Mhm.
He The amount of like just pushing eyeballs and things that he did that I am not capable of. He's done some amazing work, and it shows. And the like you were talking about Kopic Roca, that miniature that was before Gustavo touched it. That
Right.
was one of the miniatures that got Longpack the contract for
Mhm.
Stormsunder, and together they did great things. But Gustavo really did something special for those.
Yeah, I mean, they were absolutely stunning, I suppose, is there's no other way to put it.
Yeah.
Within then the Wild Ascent / Stormsunder worlds
Hmm.
that you've been building up, I know you mentioned that you have essentially the basis of an RPG for Stormsunder, and they both share
Hmm.
very similar DNA mechanically.
Hmm.
Um, do you think we may see something like that? I mean, Stormsunder is borderline an
Yeah.
RPG already.
Yes, it is.
Um, so could we see a fully fleshed out RPG for one, either or, indeed both of the worlds in the future? Or do you want to kind of, I know you said that you may revisit the card game, but miniature board game is obviously something that you seem to be nailing quite well at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So the deviation into other mediums could be a possibility for Lazy Squire, or do you want to just sort of drill down and do what you're doing and do it well at the moment?
We definitely want to focus on the projects we have in front of us. But just because if we decided down the road after Stormsunder is finished, Lavon Rising is finished, that we want to go back and do something related to them, that'll also depend on feedback. Stormsunder is doing very well even after the Kickstarter campaign, and it looks like Lavon Rising is going to do good things for Wild Assent. But just because we decide to make a RPG, if that's the path we go, that doesn't mean that it won't have miniatures. Because all of us were big fans of little tiny pieces of plastic. And I'll give an example. Lavon Rising is going to have some Stormsunder crossovers, and one of them is a young Vanessa and young Kopik. And so it's those kinds of things where like the characters in different time periods or just different sort of states of their lives is definitely like something that we can take advantage of. We could write I don't know if you've heard, but we're working with MiniWarGaming on a war game. It's very slow. Don't worry, people.
Right.
We're not. It's not a huge focus at the moment. It's like next year, maybe the year after that.
Sure.
But it's going to kind of take advantage of the groundwork that Stormsunder and Wild Assent have, and you might see some familiar faces in this far off future. We have a lot of things that we have on the horizon, but we're very we know that we need to also finish what we have.
Sure.
Wild Assent took a long time to finish. There were a lot of different factors. Some of those just don't exist anymore, but there's still a lot of work we have ahead of us, and we want to make sure that we do what we're supposed to do while we're also working on the stuff that we want to do beyond that.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've already got a fan base there, and you don't want to seem like you're cutting them off just to move on to the next shiny project down the line. But I have to say, I've been blown away by, well, Stormsunder was the first time I got a chance to sit there and play one of your games, and I wholeheartedly enjoyed that playthrough. And having had a chance to dive into Wild Assent, haven't had the chance to play the arena, but the Wild Hunt and the campaign version behind that really sparked my imagination, simply because when you get into it and you're starting to go, well, I could go this way. I can build my team of seekers around a certain hero and with a certain sort of skill set. But within it, there's so much replayability, and likewise with Stormsunder, even though it's narratively driven, there's so much to explore and expand within those games that it's not like you're going to get a game hammered out within 2 months of playing once a week with your friends and go, well, it's going on the shelf now. I've done it. There's certainly a great amount of longevity built into both of those games. And was that part and parcel of the design aesthetics or the design process and thought behind them when you were doing it, was to make them sort of breathe and have long life, so that people aren't just one and done with them and sort of can explore further and further?
I mean, yes, but part of it, I think, is just what we're designing games we want to play. I know it sounds like a cliche, but it's true. And so there's a lot of, I guess, a lot that goes into the the variety in the design, where we're Stormsunder has a ton of cards, and so we're trying, as we're making them, we're trying to put as many different ideas in them as possible, so that when you grab a character, they play drastically different than another, even if they have like a set of cards that's the same. With Wild Assent, we like very complicated abilities. Nicola especially, trying to fit them on those little cards is a huge pain in the neck. And so we come up with more and more characters, and that just creates more and more variety. And then sometimes someone goes off on their own and writes a really complicated choose your own adventure book, and then goes back and says, okay, this is what we're doing, and it's like 30 pages. I wrote the Lavon Rising demo, and it's actually slightly longer than the Stormsunder demo.
Oh, right.
Even though it won't be as long as Stormsunder, it was still kind of crazy after I finished. I'm like, I'm nuts. I don't know why I'm doing this, but it it's like I said, it's the game I want to play, and so that ends up being not complicated, but like having a lot of like, I guess, complications, like new things to throw you through a loop, and that's just what makes it entertaining.
A lot of the stuff, especially in Stormsunder, with the drop out text boxes, so you can read the
Word
whole
Sunder.
narrative, or you can just go to the little quick thing. They're very tongue in cheek. You get this long narrative text about how this vampire is talking at length, and then it just says, something like, he's talking an awful lot, you should just kill him.
Yeah.
And likewise in the campaign pages and the updates I've seen both on Kickstarter and on GameFound, there's lots of very dry humor in those updates. Is that you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is me. I have a very odd sense of humor. I'm okay writing something that only I will laugh at.
Mm-hmm.
As I was writing Stormsunder, like we'd already like designed like the way the combat was going to work. Nicola and the team, they were all like, they're working on encounters and stuff. The book is mine, and so I'm sitting here writing it, and I'm like, I write like a whole page, and I'm like, oh my god, like I'm thinking about myself, like would I read this? Like what if I didn't want to read this? And so I was like, okay, you know what? We're just going to give them the Cliff's Notes version. And so I wrote the thing, and I'm like, but that's like, why would I just like? It felt so like terrible to make it just like a dry, this is what happened thing. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to make fun of myself. I'm going to make fun of you for skipping all the stuff I wrote. And it's funny because that Lavon Rising, the campaign book, looks very similar to Stormsunder, and it brings back the Word Sunder boxes. So I've been writing them, and there was one update for Wild Assent where I wrote captions for every picture we had, and then I couldn't stop. Like people kept talking about them and asking for them, and I was like, all right, I guess I have to do this every time now. And so every single picture that goes in there has to have some stupid thing. I have a running joke against Applebee's. I don't know if they have those in the UK.
We don't, but weirdly enough, I just happen to be looking at that picture right now.
It's not one.
One of them. He's pointing
guy,
to the time when Applebee's jokes will get old for me. You may say he's pointing at never.
Yeah. I don't know what it was, but I saw that miniature, and I think it was for the Master, because that's the PVC miniature. And I was like, he's pointing at somewhere. Wouldn't it be funny if he was pointing at like the restaurant he wanted to go to? And so I wrote that, and now Applebee's is a running joke. Our illustrator finished the adversary deck card for that particular guy, and it almost looked like he was hungry, like he was gonna like kill you, but he also could have been hungry for whatever Applebee's sells. And so I like went to Applebee's website, and they brought back like, I don't know, fajita bowls or whatever it was. And so I posted it in the Discord and said, fajita bowls are back, well now you have my attention. And it's just I met with a guy, he's part of our focus group, he was in town, and so we went out to eat and we played some games, and we couldn't figure out where we should go to eat. And so we ended up going to Applebee's simply so I could take some of those PVC miniatures and post a picture of him pointing at Applebee's. I have no regrets, except for the meal at Applebee's. But so it's yes, the dry sense of humor is mine. I'm a really, really stupid person. We were kind of like, I was worried about putting it in, and so there really wasn't a ton of it in like Wild Assent, for example, because I didn't, like I think I'm funny, and I recognize that I could be the only one, and so we didn't really lean on that too much. And then we put it on the loot cards in Stormsunder. We had the Word Sunder boxes, and then people responded to it well. And so Nico was like, well, we need to do this all over the Lavon Rising page. And I'm like, all right. And so Lavon Rising page, it has all this like good content, like showing you exactly what we're offering. And then it's got random stuff like I make fun of like every single review and unboxing that we have. For some reason, our illustrator decided to draw like transitions that are goblins, like doing random funny things. There are no goblins in Wild Assent, but now there might end up being, because people like those too.
Just because they're there.
Just because they're there. Yeah. I mean, why wouldn't we? If people like them, why wouldn't we?
Well, the main thing is that people like them and you enjoy doing it.
Yes, it is fun.
If for no other reason than that is the only reason to do things. It's been fascinating having this time to sort of chat about Lazy Squire, and to see that you you're not going to be resting on your laurels, shall we say. So it'll be fascinating to see what comes next from Lazy Squire after Stormsunder and Wild Assent are out there in the wild for people to get stuck into and play out their games and see how their worlds develop in their own way. If people have any questions below, obviously they can reach out here, but we'll also get the Discord links off you and drop them in the doobly-doo below. So people, let us know what you think, what your ideas for potential Wild Assent and Stormsunder sequels could be, and we'll be speaking to you again soon. Thank you very much.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.